On a sweltering August morning in 2022, two volunteer spelunkers from the Kentucky Speleological Society descended into an unmapped section of the Mill Creek Caverns Reserve near Somerset. The cave system, once a site for amateur exploration, had been closed to the public since 2017, following a still unsolved disappearance that left locals wary and investigators frustrated. But what the volunteers found that day would change everything. Just 20 meters past the sealed lower shaft, wedged between a limestone fissure and a collapsed slab of shale, hung a piece of weathered climbing rope, visibly clean cut and coated in mineral deposits. Tied to it was a faded carabiner with initials scratched into the aluminum, R.J. For authorities in Pulaski County, those three letters reopened a file left dormant for 5 years. The unexplained vanishing of Riley James Whitaker and Elise Rowe, two tourists from Cincinnati who entered the cave system in August 2017 and never returned. At the time, it was presumed they got lost, succumbed to exhaustion, or were trapped in a sudden cave-in. Despite search efforts involving drones, heat sensors and cadaver dogs, nothing, no footprints, no gear, no digital trace had been found. Not even their rental car's GPS logs could pinpoint their path after they left the main road near Mill Creek Trailhead. Now, 5 years later, the cut rope offered a new question. If there was a clean cut, someone or something had severed it, and the presence of a carabiner with Riley's initials raised further suspicions. Was it an accident, or was there intent? The local sheriff's office reopened the case within 48 hours. Forensics took over the site. Teams returned to the caves, this time equipped with LiDAR scanners, chemical light probes, and digital mapping tools. The rope and carabiner were sent to the Kentucky State Crime Lab. The rope fibers matched the exact type Riley had reportedly purchased weeks before the trip, a 9.8 meters dynamic line with UV reactive threads, sold exclusively by a Cincinnati outfitter. Investigators revisited the original missing persons report. Riley, 27, was an experienced hobbyist climber with a history of posting cave exploration videos to a small YouTube channel. Elise, 25, was a novice, but had recently started joining him on day hikes and overnight treks. Their last confirmed location was a gas station near London's Kentucky. Surveillance footage from 8:47 a.m. on August 6, 2017 showed them purchasing snacks, water, and a folded state map. Old school, almost symbolic. Elise wore a grey windbreaker and cargo shorts. Riley carried a military-style pack and camera harness. They were expected back the next evening. They never made contact again. By August 8th, the rental SUV had been found near the trailhead, locked, keys still in Riley's side pocket, camera missing. A handwritten logbook noted Mill Creek 6A, back by dusk. The note was time-stamped 10:22 a.m., but there was no indication of where within the sprawling 14-mile cave network they'd entered, and no external logs, photos, or digital check-ins had surfaced. Now, in 2022, with new technology and renewed focus, a team of forensic geologists was brought in to analyze mineral buildup on the cut rope. Initial analysis suggested the severing had occurred within days of exposure to the cave environment, not years, meaning it was likely cut at the time of the disappearance. But what stood out even more was the absence of fraying. This was not a break due to pressure nor a natural erosion. It had been sliced, likely by a blade. This single detail shifted the tone of the investigation. In a briefing 3 days later, Special Investigator Darren Kroll quietly reopened the criminal file, reclassifying the case from missing persons, natural hazard presumed, to unresolved suspicious disappearance. The next step, reassemble the timeline. Back in 2017, Riley had posted on an online caving forum looking for unmapped entries west of Pulaski. Anyone explored Shaft 6A, noticed ventilation gaps from the ridge. That message had gone largely unnoticed, but it resurfaced in 2022 when the cut rope was found within the very shaft he had mentioned. The cave, it turned out, had been unofficially sealed in the 1980s after a partial collapse. With no public record of re-entry paths, it wasn't on state park maps. It was only known through local law and a few faded hand-drawn diagrams. With this information, investigators returned to the original list of persons of interest from 2017. Among them, a local hiking guide named Warren Denton, 54 at the time, who had encountered Riley and Elise at a nearby climbing gear shop the day before their trip. Denton, according to the store clerk, had mentioned some spots no tourist ever found. His alibi was vague. He claimed to be camping with friends, but no witnesses ever confirmed it. Back then, with no sign of struggle, foul play, or body, Denton had never been formally questioned. But now, the rope and the suggestion that someone had been with them brought him back into the light. At his current residence, Denton agreed to speak with investigators. He remembered Riley, remembered the couple, but denied ever going with them. They were green, he had a good grip, but she wasn't built for tight crawls, he said in a recorded statement. I told them to stick to daylight caves. When asked about Shaft 6A, his face changed. That place is death. You get in, the ceiling breathes with you. You feel like it's waiting. Never been back since I was young. But when shown a still of the carabiner with the initials, he claimed he had never seen it. Later that week, the forensic lab returned a second result. A partial DNA profile had been lifted from the carabiner. It matched Elise Rowe. The alloy of the carabiner itself had trace blood proteins, too degraded for full typing, but consistent with a minor hand injury. There were no other prints. Yet investigators noticed a fragment of dark material wedged in the cut fiber of the rope. Lab analysis confirmed it was carbon steel, a residue commonly left by a blade. So the rope had been cut. Elise touched it. Riley never retrieved it. The implication was chilling. Someone had been with them inside the shaft. Someone with a knife. And someone had left the carabiner behind. The question no one could yet answer. Why? At the end of part 1, investigators mapped the interior of Shaft 6A with ground-penetrating radar and discovered a sealed crawl space behind the collapse, untouched for years. Inside it, buried beneath a shallow layer of chalk sediment, was a second object, a GoPro camera, its lens shattered, its battery long dead, but its memory card intact. It was time to recover what it had seen. The GoPro was transferred to the FBI's Digital Forensics Lab in Louisville, where technicians carefully cleaned and stabilized the micro SD card before attempting data recovery. It took less than 36 hours for the first fragments of video to reappear. The footage, though damaged, opened a grim window into the final hours of Riley and Elise's journey into Shaft 6A. The first recording began at 10:49 a.m., dated August 6, 2017, just over 20 minutes after the timestamp in their trailhead log. The early scenes were uneventful. Riley, illuminated by a headlamp, navigated tight crevices while Elise followed behind, her voice echoing faintly as she called out distances between ledges. They were laughing, marking stone walls with chalk arrows. By all appearances, it was the beginning of a routine exploration, but at timestamp 12:32 p.m., the footage changed. Elise's breathing had grown louder, strained. The cave narrowed, and her voice faltered. "Riley," she whispered, this part wasn't on your map." Then the camera shook. A loud scraping sound. Dust. Silence. For the next 22 minutes, the footage was scrambled. When the video resumed, now time-stamped 1:05 p.m., the lens was fractured. The image flickered. Riley appeared in frame, adjusting the camera with a trembling hand. "We're stuck," he said. "We can't go back the way we came. That last drop collapsed." Elise was off-screen, sobbing. And then, a shadow. Barely perceptible but unmistakably human-shaped, it passed across the dim light behind them. Riley didn't see it. Elise did. "Who's there?" she shouted into the dark. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the tunnel behind them, a voice. "You shouldn't be here." That was the last coherent line before the file cut off. The footage alone was not enough to explain what had happened, but it confirmed two things: someone else was in the cave, and that someone had not intended to help. Investigators refocused their timeline. Using the original GPS data and cross-referencing known unofficial entries into Shaft 6A, they constructed a 3D model of Riley and Elise's most likely route. It led them directly through an off-map shaft known to veteran cavers as the Vein, a vertical series of chambers with unstable ridges, long since deemed too risky for recreational access. 1 week after the GoPro footage was recovered, a specialized search unit was dispatched to the Vein. There, just under a collapsed corridor near the lower split, they uncovered a sealed alcove, a natural cavity unreachable from the surface. Inside, forensic techs found a burned-out flashlight, traces of synthetic fabric, and, most disturbingly, a zippered pouch containing a license belonging to Elise Rowe. The pouch was scorched at the edges, as if someone had attempted to destroy it. Nearby, buried under compacted silt, was a second object, a switchblade. Handle worn, blade dulled, no fingerprints. But under the microscope, the crime lab isolated residual protein consistent with dried blood, too denatured for a full DNA profile, but matching the iron isotope balance previously found on the cut rope. Now they had two consistent elements. The rope had been sliced with a blade, and a matching blade had been buried inside an unreachable alcove. But still, there was no body, no signs of struggle, no confirmed death, and that ambiguity stalled the case until the call came from the University of Kentucky's geology department. A doctoral researcher, cross-referencing soil samples from Shaft 6A with mineral patterns in known limestone collapses, identified a trace anomaly: lead oxide particles, remnants of an old blasting technique used during Cold War-era mining operations. That compound, inert in natural formations, was found in the same sediment layer as the pouch and the switchblade. It meant one thing: someone had deliberately blasted that section decades ago. But why? Enter Deputy Rachel Comar, a retired mine engineer turned sheriff's investigator who had been following the case since 2017. She remembered something overlooked in the original investigation: an abandoned mining register from 1958, listing a private vertical survey conducted in the Mill Creek area. That survey, funded by a now-defunct defense contractor, had been scrubbed from state archives, but a paper copy remained in an engineer's estate files. The shaft Riley and Elise explored, it had been sealed not by natural collapse, but by post-construction demolition, to keep something or someone out or in. With this revelation, attention returned to Warren Denton. Surveillance cameras near his rural property caught his truck leaving his driveway at 2:47 a.m. on the same night the spelunkers found the rope. Denton later told investigators he had gone for a drive. A warrant was issued. Inside his home, in a locked storage shed, officers recovered 5 unlabeled VHS tapes and an aluminum climbing helmet, same make and model as Riley's, with duct tape residue matching the same kind found near the cut rope. One of the tapes was labeled with a single date, 08/06/17. The contents remain sealed under court order. What's known is this: based on internal sources, the tape contains footage recorded from a handheld camcorder. The audio is inconsistent, but one line, allegedly spoken by Denton, has been leaked unofficially. They kept asking me where the exit was. I told them. But the cave doesn't let you out once you're deep enough. It remains unverified whether this was a confession or delusion. The case against Denton is circumstantial. No physical evidence ties him directly to the disappearance. The rope, the blade, The footage, they suggest presence, not action. The statute of limitations on most charges has passed. Without a body, there can be no homicide trial. At least, not yet. But then, in October 2022, a new call came from a speleologist working further down Shaft 6A. While surveying a narrow offshoot chamber, he discovered human remains, partial, degraded but preserved by mineral flow. Near them, a camera lens, broken, and beneath a thin layer of calcite, a waterproof notebook. Inside it, scrawled in faint, shaking handwriting, August 7th, "It's just me now. Riley's gone. I hear water, but I can't find the source. I think someone is still in here. Please, if you find this, tell my parents I didn't mean to follow him." Signed, E.R. By the end of October 2022, forensic teams had extracted and positively identified the skeletal remains found deep within the Mill Creek Cavern system. The partial DNA match, confirmed through mitochondrial sampling, belonged to Elise Rowe. A watch recovered nearby, water-resistant, cracked but still bearing a faint engraving, was traced back to a birthday gift from her mother. The confirmation brought a form of closure to Elise's family, but Riley Whittaker's body was still missing, and with it, the answer to the central question, what really happened in Shaft 6A. The waterproof notebook recovered beside the remains contained only 3 pages. The first, a disoriented account of Elise's final hours. The second, a fragmented list of numbers, possibly timestamps or coordinates, many of which match camera log data from Riley's GoPro. The third page was torn, but legible enough to suggest paranoia. Someone was behind us, not a cave person. I heard boots, not shoes. Same man from the entrance. Investigators narrowed their focus. Surveillance from 2017, once dismissed, was now re-examined frame by frame. A feed from a rural highway camera, Highway 461, captured a dark SUV parked off-road at 6:32 p.m. on August 6, 2017. While the resolution was poor, analysts enhanced the footage enough to identify a distinct decal on the back window, the logo of Denton Outfitters, a local gear rental business run by Warren Denton's cousin. Under pressure, the cousin admitted Denton had borrowed a vehicle from the lot that weekend, using his employee access after hours. There was no official record, no paperwork, no GPS tracking, just a favor among family. But the time and location now placed Denton within 3 miles of the cave entrance during the critical window when Riley and Elise vanished. Despite these developments, the case faced a deadlock. Denton's attorney denied any wrongdoing and called the investigation a witch hunt based on circumstantial noise. But behind the scenes, law enforcement expanded their reach. Phone records from Denton's 2017 device, long since deactivated, were pulled from archived telecom towers. One outgoing call from August 7th stood out, 2:11 a.m., made to a prepaid burner phone that was never traced. The call lasted only 17 seconds. Its content remains unknown, but its timing, just hours after Elise's likely death, added another layer of suspicion. Meanwhile, a quiet fracture began to form within the investigative team. While some officers pushed to build a case against Denton based on proximity, behavior, and recovered items, others hesitated. There was no conclusive link, no DNA, no confession, and troublingly, new evidence suggested a deeper, more disturbing possibility. A FOIA request filed by a local journalist unearthed an old Department of the Interior report from 1973, detailing unauthorized excavation activity in the same coordinates as Shaft 6A. The report, redacted in large portions, referenced off-the-record mining projects and civilian interference. One note in the margin, handwritten, read, "Entry not advised. Secondary shaft unsealed. Collapse protocols incomplete." Whatever the project was, it hadn't been fully closed, and if Riley had truly been following unofficial maps, it's possible he and Elise wandered into a zone never meant to be accessed again. And then came the second shock. A climber named Alan Brecker, a former military engineer and amateur historian, reached out to investigators with a photo he'd taken in 2016. It showed a narrow crack in the wall near shaft 6A, with something embedded inside, what appeared to be an aluminum tag. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. But after cleaning the image with modern filters, the serial on the tag became visible, MC Knight 014. That code matched an archived registry tied to post-war bunker testing sites, one of which overlapped precisely with the shaft 6A grid. According to Brecker, the tag hadn't been there naturally. It had been welded into the stone, which meant someone had gone into the cave post-collapse and placed it intentionally. Why? And more importantly, who? In the wake of this discovery, the theory began to shift. Denton might not have lured Riley and Elise in. He may have followed them. Authorities began to consider a chilling possibility. What if Denton had stumbled onto something buried decades earlier, something secret, dangerous, or simply forbidden, and had been guarding it in his own way? A local with knowledge, with fear, and with a compulsion to keep others away. The unanswered questions began to stack. Why had Denton refused to explore the shaft with investigators when asked in 2017? Why had he visited the site again in 2022, the same week the rope was discovered? What was on the VHS tapes seized from his shed? Only one had been viewed so far, and even that partially redacted in court. But before authorities could press further, another obstacle emerged. Denton disappeared. On November 18, 2022, police arrived at his home to execute a second warrant. The door was unlocked. A single pot of coffee sat cooling on the counter. The VHS tapes were gone. On the bedroom wall, drawn in thick marker, was a single line. I told them not to go that far. He was never seen again. No body, no signs of struggle, just absence. And so the case turned from an unsolved disappearance into something broader, more fractured. Elise Rowe was confirmed dead. Riley Whittaker was missing. Denton, possibly a suspect, possibly a bystander, was gone. And deep within the sealed chambers of Mill Creek Caverns, something remained buried, waiting. December 2022. Winter settled over Pulaski County, and with it came silence, not just from the caves, but from the investigation. Denton's disappearance left a vacuum. No signs of where he went, no financial activity. His truck was found 2 weeks later, abandoned near a quarry 30 miles south of Somerset, keys in the ignition, door wide open, windshield fractured, but no blood, no prints, just a boot print in the mud, size 11, unmatched. The authorities debated what remained to be done. Without Denton, there would be no trial. Without Riley's remains, no formal closure. The state's attorney quietly closed the active file in February 2023, citing lack of prosecutable evidence. It was an administrative decision, not one born of justice, but one final piece arrived. In March 2023, a lab technician reanalyzing the GoPro card recovered a corrupted file fragment, just 11 seconds long, date stamped several hours after the last confirmed footage. The audio was barely intact, the video frozen, but a voice, calm, deliberate, could be heard whispering, "He told us it sealed itself, but caves don't do that." The voice was male. It wasn't Riley's. A match with Denton's voice could not be confirmed, but those who had heard him speak believed it was him. What followed in the investigation's final days was a quiet unraveling. Geologists, reviewing the collapse near Shaft 6A, confirmed the sediment structure showed signs of multiple reinforcements, concrete mixed with limestone, poured decades apart. The implication: the cave had been closed deliberately more than once, by different parties, at different times, to keep people in or out. What exactly lay in the sealed areas of Mill Creek Caverns remains unknown. Access has since been restricted by the Kentucky Department of Natural Resources. All public caving permits within a 10-mile radius were suspended indefinitely for safety, but locals have their own theories. Denton was known to explore alone, often at night. Some believe he found something years earlier and dedicated his life to guarding it. Others say he was a man with ghosts, not criminal, but consumed by fear and guilt. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. Elise Rowe's remains were buried in Cincinnati in April 2023. Her family declined to speak publicly, but her sister provided a short statement. "We waited 5 years to bring Elise home. We still don't know what happened to Riley. We may never know, but Elise fought to survive. That's what matters." Riley's parents keep a photograph of him in their living room, taken 2 weeks before the trip. They have never moved out of their home. Every year, on August 6th, they drive to the trailhead and leave 2 things: a fresh coil of climbing rope and a lantern, lit and left burning overnight. The rope found in the cave in 2022 was never claimed. It now rests in an evidence locker, tagged and boxed, beneath a case file that reads, "Status Unresolved." Somewhere beneath the hills of Kentucky, past the fractured limestone and sealed stone corridors, the last footsteps of Riley Whittaker remain, along with the questions no one can fully answer. Why were they followed? Why was the rope cut? And what did they see down there in the dark?